All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session. Hopefully you're having a great day, and thanks for taking time to join Burwood, Citrix, and Microsoft to today's webinar around Modern Workplace. My name is Chad Price. I'm a practice manager here for Burwood Group, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. And today's topic is around modern workplace and the solutions around modern workplace. And Burwood Group is happy to have both Microsoft and Citrix join us for today's webinar. They'll be able to provide some content around their respective solutions. A few housekeeping items before we get started here. We've allocated about 45 minutes for this webinar. Probably about 25 to 30 minutes of actual content. The remaining time will be spent in Q&A. We are recording this session, and we'll send out this recorded session to all registrants upon when we complete the webinar. If you have any questions throughout, please feel free to use either the chat window, or you can hold your question to the end in Q&A. Either are acceptable. You should see the Q&A window on the right side of your browser, and we'll get to as many of those as we possibly can within the time allotted. As a thank you for attending today's webinar, we're giving away, let me look in here. We're giving away a GoPro. So, all we ask of you to be eligible to win is ask a question, either through the chat or through the Q&A session. And we'll randomly select one winner at the end of the webinar. And obviously you must be present to win. So good luck to those. So without further ado, let's get into it. As I said, my name is Chad Price. Been with Burwood Group a little over 10 years, about 10 years now. Been in consulting as it relates to the modern workplace. Today we call it modern workplace. There's been other names for it in the past, whether it's end user compute, traditional desktop computing, those kinds of things. But I've been in consulting for 22 years around this particular topic. Lots of experience around it. But as today I'm kind of leading a practice with multiple talented engineers that have a focus around the modern workplace. So with that, let me introduce you to Rob Shaw of Microsoft. Rob, could you take a few seconds to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Rob Shaw. I joined Microsoft through the FS Logics acquisition. I'm part of the Azure VMware Solutions Group today, as well as the Azure Virtual Desktop Group in a capacity as a GBB, or Global Black Belt is the term. I've spent some time at Citrix and Dell, both focusing, as well as Wise, focusing in the VDI realm. So pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Rob. Avelio, would you kindly introduce yourself, please?
Certainly. I'm Avelio Garcia. I'm one of the lead sales engineers. I'm currently covering our CSP business on the East. I've been here at Citrix. I'm actually, LinkedIn jumped the gun and says that I'm already 12 years at Citrix. It's actually going to be in June, but about to be 12 years here at Citrix. I've had the chance to jump through a few of our different teams, from all on the technical facing, right, from our consulting organization, our managed services team, and now throughout a few different teams on the pre-sales side as well. And I've had the chance to move through some of the Citrix products internally as well, right, from our core apps and desktops business, as well as our networking and mobility, content collaboration, and security solutions as well.
Great. Well, Rob and Avelio, thank you for joining us today. So look forward to your content. Just a quick agenda. Today we're looking to cover, I call it the state of modern workplace, and this is really under the Burwood lens. It's not, looking at Gartner. It's not Microsoft specific, it's not Citrix specific, but it's the way we at Burwood like to view the modern workplace. So I'll cover that, talk about some of the trends and challenges as well as high level architecture. Then throughout this, I think we have 2 or 3 poll questions that we're interested in getting your feedback on that we'll ask throughout. So we're looking for your participation in that. Then we'll transition over into Rob's track around desktops in Microsoft Azure, give him an opportunity to talk about, from the Microsoft perspective, how Azure Virtual Desktops and those types of solutions fit within the modern workplace. Then we'll transition over to Avilio. Some of you may have heard the renaming around Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Service. Now Desktops as a Service. So Avilio will spend a few minutes talking about how Citrix adds value on top of that and their overall solution. Then we'll close it out by talking about a visionary workshop, if you will. Then finish up with any kind of Q&A. Then the final thing will be the drawing for the GoPro. So with that, let's get started. So state of the modern workplace. Again, under the Burwood's kind of eyes, trends that we're seeing around the modern workplace. The first and obvious one over the last couple of years, every organization throughout the world has had the need to transition, if they hadn't done so already, to almost 100% remote for many organizations, and now they're transitioning into kind of that hybrid type of situation, where everybody that used to be within the corporate confines, now they're providing opportunity. Some of the largest corporations out there providing more of a hybrid approach. Obviously, from a distributed enterprise capability. Then the other thing that I would say is from a key trend is the cloud-based solutions. There's a reason we're here today talking about desktops within Azure and the added value of Citrix on top of that. We have many customers and organizations that are pushing to leverage cloud-based technology to extend their end user compute kind of strategy, or as we're calling it now, the modern workplace strategy, not just for VDI, but other elements of the modern workplace as well, which I'll touch on here quickly. Secure access. So as you're moving to the cloud, making sure that kind of capability is very secure. So security being top of mind, especially in a hybrid or remote scenario. IT has less, or feels like they have less visibility into the particular endpoint, into the user devices. So having a method in which to truly secure that data and the intellectual property is top of mind for most organizations today. Then obviously the one that continues to address the BDI or modern workplace is, how do we lower costs? How do we save costs? If we're going to be deploying within the cloud, how do we go about saving on some of those costs? So here's the first poll question. So if you could answer appropriately, with your respective organizations or companies, do you have a cloud strategy to address your hybrid work? So either you do, you don't, or a combination. If you've done it since the global pandemic, be interested to know that. But if you don't, you need more information, would like to know that as well. We'll give you a few minutes to go through that. Business challenges. So these are I would say that the top challenges that we see within our customers as we're talking to them as it relates to the modern workplace. What are they trying to address? Increase productivity and efficiency. And the thing around that is support all workforce demands. So if we're talking about 100% remote, a hybrid, or business as usual, we need to have solutions in place that will make sure that our end users are being as productive as possible. Also, with the um, strategy of hybrid work, the employee experience is really key and top of mind for most organizations. Yes, I can take my laptop or desktop home and work remotely and be productive, but how is that overall experience? Is it one that they feel like they're being the most productive or not? So that's that's a key challenge that many organizations are facing today. I talked about this support cloud delivery models. So they want to be able to leverage cloud wherever possible. They want to reduce, you know, CapEx types of expenditures, especially some of those large organizations we've seen where organizations are starting to let the leases go on either the colo or private data center and venturing out into a cloud delivery model. So how does that work into a modern workplace? How do we take advantage of all the innovations that Microsoft, Citrix, and others have put out there into an as a service delivery model? How do we take advantage of that and wrap it around the modern workplace? If you see the poll there on the right, if you get a few minutes, make sure you answer that question. We'll close the poll here in just a few seconds. Accelerate the time to market, quickly deploy many endpoints. We've seen this firsthand at Burwood, where we've had customers have the business need to be able to quickly spin up thousands and thousands of endpoints in the cloud if the need arises. A big thing around that has been the ransomware attacks. It's been um, in the news for the last couple of years. How do we enable a solution to where we can ensure that our workforce stays productive by being able to quickly deploy endpoints in something like Azure? We're talking, multi-thousands of endpoints, or even for some of those other organizations that may only have 50 or 100. If those get locked up through a ransomware type of attack, how do we address that? We want to make sure that we can quickly maintain business as usual. Address this a little bit earlier. How do we lower those costs for end user compute? How does today's modern workplace address lowering that capital expenditure or even operational expenses as it relates to modern workplace? Then providing the flexibility needed for more of a hybrid work environment, having things like security controls and policy controls and governance and flexibility, user experience, all of that in a hybrid method by having kind of like a single pane of glass, if you will, to manage all of that. So those are some of the key business challenges that we at Burwood are seeing with some of our customers and how to address. So with the poll here closing, here we see, majority of you, 76% are already leveraging cloud for hybrid work. That's fantastic. And within the next year, almost, 20% within the next year. A few there that over the next couple of years, but nobody has said that, we don't have that kind of cloud strategy. That says a lot around what organizations have been doing over the last couple of years and what they're planning to do in the next years. We used to plan for 5-year business plans, but that's kind of difficult today with how rapidly technology changes. So over the next couple of years, very telling. So thank you for that.
Yeah, Chad, I would say we've seen a lot of that, right? Especially over the last 2 years. I think that hybrid model of, hey, I may have had a cloud strategy, but I think it became critical during the pandemic, right? People couldn't implement fast enough. So I think ditto to what everybody is saying and finding here in the poll.
Yep. There was that initial kind of need to get everybody working remotely, but now many of them have addressed maybe some gaps that they've seen within that kind of strategy and moving more to, how do we leverage more of the cloud technology? So that's where, companies like Microsoft and Citrix get involved. So Okay, next. This is our view, more of a logical view. When I say our view, Burwood's view of the modern workplace. If you work from the bottom up, the deployment model from your traditional data center to public cloud, whether it be Azure, GCP, AWS, IBM, Oracle, whatever the public cloud of choice. More of a hybrid cloud, being able to integrate that as well. Transitioning to pure software as a service methods. That's becoming more and more popular with many organizations, and obviously leveraging the public internet. But where today's kind of conversation lands from our view of the modern workplace is really around how we as a professional services organization help organizations deploy desktops and applications using technologies such as Azure and Citrix Cloud. So, that's a component of the modern workplace. Obviously, we see a lot of other elements to that, elements in the sense of enabling technologies, whether it's a VPN, any kind of automation, endpoint security, deploying the OSs itself, identity and access management, leveraging Azure AD, Okta, there's Ping, there's others out there, but all that plays into the kind of whole spectrum of the Burwood view of the modern workplace. But for today's webinar, we're really going to focus around desktop and application delivery. So with that, I'd like to kind of hand it over to Rob, and Rob, I'd like for you to tell us from a Microsoft perspective, what does desktops within Azure look like? What's your point of view? And I'll just hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Chad. Yeah, I think, I'm certainly happy to share that information about, what does Microsoft Azure-based virtual desktops look like today. And I think it's kind of important to look at a little bit of the history that surrounds AVD and M365. And I think it, kind of goes back to, well, I kind of like to say that AVD is a 20-year-old startup, right? Goes back to Windows NT, where Windows NT 4.0 had a terminal server edition, and that was really the beginning of being able to do that from a Microsoft standpoint, right? And a lot of that came out of our partnership with Citrix. Yet, what you find that being able to build a native VDI environment solely on Microsoft today on-prem, it's challenging, right? You've got a lot of back-end infrastructures. You've got brokers and gateways and database, and you've got to make it all redundant. And then you may need to spread it around the globe to put it in different data centers. So that's a very challenging thing to take on, right? And certainly a great place where our partners, definitely toe the lion's share there to be able to deploy those in an on-prem environment. Not to say that you can't be successful, you just have to find the right talent who's able to build that out. Today with Azure VDI, we really have kind of changed that, right? And being able to deliver it in kind of a whole purpose single element. Chad, if you would advance to the next slide. Basically, what we've found is that being able to take away the back end build, design, administration of building those gateways and brokers, and what's the right number of brokers, taking that all out of context to where you get to focus on the things that are more important to you as an organization, your applications, your users, and your virtual machines that you want to deliver. So you get to put a lot more emphasis and focus on the content you're delivering instead of building out, all of the various infrastructure pieces. And with that, today we have really two offerings at Microsoft natively. One is Cloud PC, and the other is AVD, formerly known as WVD. And they're fairly similar in some ways, and we're gonna kind of compare and contrast those. But at the core, the main goal of Cloud PC is to give you a turnkey DaaS service that you basically just deliver an image and it gets taken care of for you. Whereas AVD is more of your traditional build it out kind of as you want it. Partners play a big part here, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about both of them actually. And Chad, if you could next slide, please. So I think kind of on the first side here, the Cloud PC, I think when I talk to customers, one of the very first things that kind of puts it into that bucket, of a Windows 365 Cloud PC delivery solution is that they want a per user per month price, right? Instead of build it and you pay on consumption. So what your cost is. It's a per user per month, depending on a couple of the options that you make, but it's very predictable, from that perspective. I think at the other side of it is when you want something that's fully managed, and it really takes the administration out of your hands to where you really don't have to have the key people to be able to run that VDI environment. So these are good for kind of work groups or small organizations, perhaps. The other key thing is that I'm going to deliver just a personal desktop. That's the term we use at Microsoft. I think elsewhere we've always referred to that as a persistent desktop. So it's that one-to-one mapping of a Windows 10 or Windows 11 desktop out to the users. So you have a simple dedicated image or a pre-designed image that you're going to push out to everybody. And that becomes the desktop, and it can get personalized for each user from that point forward, right? On
And
the
I
other
would,
side,
yeah, I'd
go
like to
ahead.
add, just from the Burwood point of view, where we see our customers, we have customers that are, small in size and some very large customers as well. The ones that are looking to take advantage of VDI within the cloud, specifically around Azure Virtual Desktop, has been this cloud VDI type of solution with Citrix Cloud Management Plane added on to it. So that's why it's important for us to get the Microsoft viewpoint, but also the Citrix viewpoint. But for those organizations that have multiple types of either work streams or use cases, you'll commonly hear it called. That's where the cloud VDI model makes a lot of sense for those organizations, whether you're only talking, a couple hundred or multi-thousands types of deployments. We're seeing, heavy emphasis around the cloud VDI model. Whereas if the organization, they still may be large in size, and what Rob had pointed out, the cloud PC solution, if there's one well-defined business case where you want it as simple as possible, just spin it up and give them that personalized desktop, cloud PC is a great example. So I just wanted to throw that in there real quick, Rob.
Yeah, great points, Chad. Appreciate that. Yeah, on the Azure Virtual Desktop side, I think just like you said, it's really two things. It's both a good platform to be able to deliver that our partners can enhance and build upon, or it's a good solution, all in, depending on what the use case is. But I think it's that kind of flexible design. You get to build it the way you want it, and then only pay for what you're consuming. So if you have periods of time that are kind of flex and you need to bring more users on for, say, holiday seasons, you can bring them on and shut it down and not have to pay. Whereas on the predictable per user pricing, that's you're going to set that ahead of time. So you have I think another key thing is you don't have to just deliver a persistent virtual desktop. You can do that, or you can do pooled desktops where users can share machines, or they can log out and different users are getting different VMs. Or you can do multi-session desktops where multiple users on one VM gives you the ability to do published applications as well as published desktops. And that can greatly reduce your cost base as well. So depending on the use case, they each can kind of fit a different space. Chad, if you go ahead and advance here. So from the architecture perspective, one thing that's key is that both solutions leverage a lot of the same infrastructure. That middle section that we're talking here, the web access gateway, SQL database, broker and diagnostics, all of that is the piece that's really managed by Microsoft. And it's spread around the globe in almost every data center. And even if it's not in every data center, you still have the ability to deploy those desktops and applications in really any Azure region around the globe. Outside over to the right, this is where it becomes a little bit different. Some of this really gets managed for you, where you just bring the virtual machine and the deployment and provisioning is handled for you. On the AVD side, this is where you're going to customize the image. You're going to make these assignments integrate with your Active Directory or Azure Active Directory, which is a new feature recently added. You can leverage FS Logics from a profile perspective or other ways to do that. Yet both solutions are going to leverage the remote desktop clients. They're slightly different than your traditional remote desktop client, but they go across about any device that you want to connect from, or you can connect from a browser that's HTML5 based to be able to get access. So it really simplifies that access and enables that deployment.
And Rob, this is Nick. We have a question from the chat in regards to how automated is integration between Azure AD and the the two flavors of VDI that you presented, AVD and the Cloud PC. For instance, they're looking to see if they create a user and place them in a specific container. What kind of automation can be spawned from that? Can they have their Cloud PC or VDI automatically created from the image? And if not, again, what kind of integration is there?
Yeah, it's a great question. On the Cloud PC, it really keys off of that Azure Active Directory user to be able to deploy, and the provisioning is kind of automatic based on your deployment settings. Flip side, on the AVD side, up until recently, well, it's really both. We've had users in Azure Active Directory while VMs still sat in traditional Active Directory, and now today we can have those VMs be in both. And you have the ability to create these desktop groups that you're going to assign those to the various users. So it's important that in most cases, we're setting up a sync with your on-prem Active Directory to sync into Azure Active Directory, or we're keying off your existing Azure Active Directory user base to be able to point those users. And in most cases, we're pointing groups of users to those desktops. So it's very streamlined. That's a good question.
Hey, Rob, we had another question too on the endpoints. So is AVD and Windows 365 available for users who are using, for example, a thin client, or is it only restricted to end users on PCs?
Was that on thin clients? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. We have a couple of partners who right out of the gate built integration, I think, like Strato and Igel. They supported the client pretty quickly. More recently, I know Wise now has a native connector for AVD, and a lot of others are starting to kind of come around to be able to do it. And even if not, in most cases, they're able to deliver even from a web client type connection. So yeah, most of the thin clients I think are pretty much on board at this point. Good question.
As you can see, we put up another poll question there. So we'd like to understand, you for those participants, you currently have an existing Azure environment that either you're looking to expand your virtual desktops into, whether you're an on-premise type of VDI type of customer, or looking to, start playing with the VDI in the cloud.
Yeah,
Back to you, Rob.
Good poll questions. I'm looking forward to hearing the answers to those. Yeah, and I think this kind of keys on what Chad said, earlier. What's the right solution for me, right, and my organization? And I think in some cases, when 365 makes sense for that, I don't have the capability to manage it myself. Um, maybe I just need it for a small work group. Or one use case I see a lot here is vendor access. Hey, I just need to give access to my vendors so they can get into internal resources, but I don't want to send out laptops to people that may only be around for a few months. It's a perfect use case, I think, for those, type of environments. Azure Virtual Desktop again flips over to that flexibility, and I think if you need to deliver a custom image, or you want to deliver published applications, maybe bring down some of the cost because you can shut down resources that you're not using. Something that we see a lot is that remote app streaming for organizations that are, say, software orgs, that they make an application that they want to deliver via remote app, so they can do that and just deliver a published application. Sometimes the virtual machine choices are limited on the Win365 side. For example, if you're doing graphic processing, so you need a GPU in your environment, that certainly would drive you over to Azure Virtual Desktop. And I think then, again, where we were mentioning the Azure Virtual Desktop is a really great platform, for situations when I need something more that, organizations like Citrix can build on top of, right? And one example that comes up a lot for me, because I do a lot of work in the healthcare space, is organizations that have Imprivata, for example. Today, that's not supported natively in Azure Virtual Desktop. Citrix has been supporting Imprivata for a long time, right? So that would be, a use case where absolutely, we'll introduce, or more than likely the customer already knows their Citrix team, to be able to do that. And we work together from the AVD side and the Citrix side to build the right architecture for the customer. I
Yeah.
think in a lot of cases, folks are on-prem running VDI, and they want to run some in Azure. Maybe it's not for all of their users. So that hybrid scenario becomes critical, and you can do that really well with Citrix.
Yeah, a couple things here, Rob, if you don't mind. One, if we can go ahead and close out the poll, we'll get some answers to that, and looking forward to that. But from a Burwood perspective, when we are working with our customers, majority of the time it's around this kind of either multi-cloud or hybrid architecture that Rob has identified here. There is an existing investment on-prem. How do we look to start leveraging cloud services? As I talked about early on in the kind of the business case or business challenges, we already have an expensive investment on-prem, but I need to start leveraging some of my M365 entitlements. We see a majority of our customers that we're working with in this kind of hybrid architecture mode.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point that you made there, is that, in the case of Azure Virtual Desktop, you're leveraging entitlements that you already have that get you access to the AVD, and you just pay for the consumption, which is nice.
But it's also an interesting dilemma that customers are going to have to consider too, because when you're looking to optimize cost, if you're doing a kind of a Azure Virtual Desktop, looking at your business model and seeing, you know, do these VDI instances need to be running 24/7, as opposed to establishing rules so that those machines get shut off, so you're not consuming unnecessary expense just because VDI is running within the cloud. So making sure you understand your use cases and how they're going to be deployed is critical for that cost savings element. So with this question, let's see what kind of answers we have here. Currently running, less than 10%, which I'm surprised by, to be honest with you. Yes, currently having an Azure environment, I'm not surprised by that. Don't currently have Azure. My guess is that's either AWS or GCP, or you do have Azure, you just don't know it if you're doing something like Office 365, for example. But specifically for something like a modern workplace or VDI in the cloud, those are interesting answers. All right. Well, Rob, thank you for that kind of review of Azure Virtual Desktops. And just a quick time check here. We got another 10 minutes or so. Don't mean to push you here, Avilio.
I got you. I got
Be
you.
aware of it. Desktops as a service with Citrix and Azure. You want to take us away here?
Yeah, certainly, certainly, and I think that the topic that you were just covering, right, leveraging those on-prem infrastructure and dollars that have already been spent is something that we've been very big on, right, and enabling the workloads to run out of all the locations where they are today and where they need to be in the future, right? So enabling a hybrid multi-cloud, just a multi-cloud in general, and kind of taking that term away from just the public cloud providers and more the fact that your data center, right, is your company's cloud. So whether we need to have multiple physical data centers, right, colo facilities, or integrate with multiple cloud providers, that's going to be a great place where we're going to be able to leverage our technologies and provide the connectivity and end user experience to be there and seamlessly integrate, right, all of those different locations, right, resource locations, as we call them here at Citrix, into a single cohesive end user experience, right? So we can make it to where it's really transparent to the end user to have resources that are being delivered on-prem, but also consume some additional resources that are being provided by a different data center or public cloud, right? We could certainly be delivering both desktops on-prem as well as AVD desktops, right, out of Azure at the same time, and potentially even to the same set of users, right? So we're here in partnership, right, in this kind of trifecta that we have on the call today, to join in the different solutions and leverage the technologies to what they can do each the best of their abilities, right? So enabling the hybrid multi-cloud is going to be key, but optimizing operations is just as important, right? Having the right tools and simple access to things like, as Chad, as you were mentioning, having those quick controls to be able to power manage those VMs, right? So we make it very, very easy to be able to not only do the provisioning, right, spinning out those hundreds or thousands of desktops very, very quickly as the environment needs it, but also have the ability of actually scaling that back, right? So as the usage, whether seasonal or during the day or week, has those peaks and lulls, we'll be able to make sure that the environment is right sized, right? Have tools to optimize the performance of those end users during their usage on their desktops, right? To be able to provide higher scalability for a single VM, right? Which is going to produce cost savings on the overall environment as we have less overall machines needed to support those end users, right? Doing things like the Teams optimization that we have greatly reduces some of the consumption on the compute side for those virtual machines, which enable us to support more users on each one of those, right? And throughout it all, provide an even further enhance end user experience, right? That Teams optimization makes it to where the session is actually running from that user's local machine, regardless of the type of endpoint that they're leveraging, right? We had some questions around thin clients before. So being able to leverage those thin clients and still leverage just a tiny bit of resources from that in order to produce a better end user experience and at the same time a higher user density on the compute side, right? And this all needs to be delivered securely, right? So we're going to be integrating with Azure Active Directory, right? Whether it's on-prem Active Directory, third-party IDPs, in order to provide multi-factor authentication and have it all integrated into their sessions. Outside of just the security for the apps and desktops, which is definitely the focus, we also have the ability of providing security for those users that are going to be outside of the virtual desktop scenario, right? So being able to provide enhanced security for all users, regardless of whether they need a full virtual desktop or a quick access to just a few different web applications, we'll be able to layer or apply a layer of the security controls from that perspective in order to make sure that the entire environment is secure.
And Avilio, this is Nick. We do have another question here from the chat.
Sure.
Are there any reasons or scenarios specifically where hybrid solution would be recommended, or is purely cloud-based best fail-safe or the most robust solution?
There are certainly reasons as to why, right? When we go into, for example, GPU type workloads, those are very, very expensive, right? Really, regardless of where they're getting deployed. But depending on the usage, it might be more cost effective to continue to run those workloads on-prem, right, within your own data center from that perspective, or potentially a colo. There may be compliance reasons that restrict the fact that public cloud is not currently an option, or that there would be enhanced additional restrictions applied should that be the case. So going with an on-prem or colo type of deployment would be a better fit for that particular scenario. That's a really good question, right? It's more of a case by case, but there certainly are scenarios where leveraging a public cloud is not really an option, or particularly not an option in this stage. And so additional transformations, whether it's on the compliance side, on the feature sets, right, capabilities, and additional securities from those providers to be able to support the compliance requirements, or potentially for performance reasons, we might see a need to maintain on-prem deployments for the time being, right? That is all something that has been changing in the past, right? When Citrix started, no one thought about the fact that you could work remotely. Over the last couple of years, we've certainly proved that working from home is something that we can do every day, and even increase the productivity from that perspective. So regardless of where the user is and where those resources need to be at, Citrix will be here to provide connectivity and the end user performance for those. And so, right, to enable the hybrid multi-cloud, to expand a little bit further on this, right, we have a single management layer that will now enable us to manage resources and provision resources, and right, work through and do the additional configurations of those different deployments. So whether we need to support, because of the fact that we are potentially in a migration path, right, where we still have resources that we're in progress of migrating over into Azure or any of the other public clouds, right? Or because of the fact that, right, there's compliance reasons or additional performance reasons as to why we're going to have multiple resource locations, we'll still be able to manage it all as a single cohesive environment, right? It's going to be a single pane of glass for the end users, and even for the admins to be able to say, hey, I need to provision 10 desktops, and oh wait, I need to provision 5 on-prem and 5 in the cloud. And yeah, it'll be a process for each of those, but it'll be out of the same console. We do need to obviously delineate which machines we're going to be provisioning at a particular time. But we'll very quickly and kind of in lockstep be able to say, hey, give me 5 desktops out of the on-prem data center, and also give me 5 desktops out of Azure next. And then with that, right, we can make the most of the existing investments, right? We can make sure that, hey, the servers still have a few more years of service. Let's go ahead and leverage those. I've actually been in conversations with some partners recently where they were looking to kind of reorganize their current data center solutions in order to be able to provide a higher redundant on-prem solution as some of the customer base is moving further into Azure, and be able to have additional services for those customers that do have the higher on-prem requirements from that perspective, right? So even being able to repurpose that existing hardware for a few different options is also something that we're seeing now. You could go ahead go to the next slide. Right, from an operations perspective, I've talked to a few of these, right? So with leveraging the smart tools, right, and auto scale in order to provide the right level of control, the power and capacity management, right? Having the tools for help desk, right? Citrix Director in order to provide monitoring, as well as we can integrate with additionals like analytics for performance and for security, right? And analytics for performance is going to give us the visibility into what all of those virtual machines and end users are doing and consuming. And from a security perspective, we're going to have AI be able to go in and say, hey, what, first assess what the user's normal behavior is, and big data analytics will be helping us with that, and then be able to determine whenever there is a behavior that's out of the norm. A user is logging in out of a different geographical location, out of off hours, right? Non-standard business hours. And yeah, this might be something that the user always does. Thursdays at 10, they log in and they start doing their weekly, for example. Or it might be someone doing actual malicious activity. And with it, we could then take action on those findings. So as the user's security risk score increases, right, depending on those actions, we could then have the environment have automated action applied to them to restrict what things those users can do until there's further analysis on the environment. And then, right, we also talked about the provisioning perspective, right? So having the tools to be able to quickly update, upgrade, and provision additional machines from that perspective. So we're optimizing both the initial deployment of the environment as well as the day-to-day management from an admin perspective as to what the admins need to do. We could go ahead to the next one. And then from a security, right, and I also touched base briefly on this, leveraging single sign-on access, right, having the ability to do multiple different integrations from an MFA perspective, even, passwordless access, right, having the different optimizations for Teams and a few of the other vendors, and this does include, right, basically all of our supported endpoints and continuing to increase on those. Having the compliance to be able to fit into those different regulatory industries, leveraging some of our additional technologies, right, like SD-WAN and even integrating with Azure Virtual WAN to make sure that we have the performance and the connectivity from a security perspective, right, being able to apply all of the QoS and additional settings from that perspective in order to have the most secure and optimized sessions from there. And then as with all of these different tools, obviously, the goal is to reduce the overall risk. So we could go ahead to the next one. And so the next one, right, is all about the different cost savings of the Better Together story, right? Leveraging Azure, right? Leveraging AVD from a deployment perspective and layering on top Citrix, which will further reduce the cost of the overall solution, right? As you can see, there's additional savings from a licensing perspective. There's some big savings from an operational perspective, and there's even further ones from an infrastructure perspective, right? When we are leveraging the public cloud, and in this case, right, leveraging Microsoft to provide the compute, the storage, the networking facilities, right, and leverage the optimizations tools to reduce the end user compute, reduce the amount of transactions we're actually doing in the cloud, and provide that great end user experience are all going to be key things from that perspective. So just to do the recap here, right? So there's a lot of things that we're doing to support Azure Virtual Desktop, right? From a management perspective and being able to support the multiple locations, having all the different provisioning tools and monitoring facilities, right? Having the collaboration and user experience with key tools like the high definition experience, right? The ICA protocol and the different enhancements we've been doing to the different features and security enhancements there. And then leveraging things like app protections, secure private access, right? Leveraging session recording and the authentication configurations there in order to make sure that we can have the security be top notch and right meet those compliance needs.
Great. Thank you, Avilio. So I'm cautious of time. I appreciate Rob and Avilio providing their input. You know, you may be asking yourself a question, how do I get started? Or how do I expand upon my modern workplace or VDI in the cloud deployment? How do you prioritize that? Put up a poll question here. Are you interested in doing like a readiness assessment? Maybe where you're at today, doing a gap analysis, and from there building out a more mature, if you will, roadmap around your modern workplace. VDI being a key piece of this, both apps and desktop delivery, but other elements as well. So that's something that Burwood offers our customers. So we'd be interested in hearing from you on that aspect of it. So what does it look like? It's more of a workshop-oriented approach. And what we do is we look to identify, you know, either current challenges within your solution today, whether it's, you know, a technical challenge, a user experience issue, employee, you know, improve just the overall employee experience, leveraging more of your cloud capabilities through some of the technologies that both Rob and Vilio talked about. Look at your current work streams. Are they best optimized? How do you want to either optimize those or streamline those to make them easier to manage? And from that, we build out this roadmap or architecture plan, if you will, in a draft form that can expand upon maybe what you already have. So if you haven't already addressed the poll question, make sure you get it in so we can go ahead and get that closed. And if you're interested in doing the modern workplace kind of roadmap or journey, there's the URL. You can go to burwood.com/modern-workplace-workshop. That'll notify us and we can get back in touch with you in regards to getting something scheduled and get it on the calendar.
I think you know, on that one poll question, I think on interested in doing assessments, I think, yeah, I'm sure you leverage a variety of different tools for being able to do that, and we've done quite a few of those in conjunction with them. You know, and the results of, you know, are pretty dramatic on what it would take to run in Azure. And you know, I think usually those assessments are typically I know the software at least is free to be able to run those assessments.
Yep. And we leverage those quite often as well, for sure. So about quarter of you, yeah, you're interested, use that URL. If you didn't write it down, again, we're recording this and we'll send it out to all the registrants and it'll be within the recording. No, you may have a good solid plan in place, but just know that modern workplace is much more than just VDI in the cloud. So, you know, if you're interested in talking outside of a workshop around some of the other technologies, you can go ahead and register on that link as well. Not sure, you know, reach out to your account manager for Burwood. We can have further discussions around that. All right, so Q&A. We'll open it up for any kind of questions for either Citrix or Microsoft or even Burwood that we haven't already addressed. Any questions by any of the participants?
So Chad, we do have a question in regards to the modern workplace architecture, Burwood's modern workplace architecture that you had laid out. The question is asking, is Burwood using that architecture today in its entirety or just part of what was shown?
From a services perspective, we provide services around all of those elements. So whether it's desktops and applications, identity access management, endpoint security, OS delivery, OS deployment, that is, we'll touch all elements of that from a services, professional services perspective. It's not just VDI in the cloud.
Thank you, Chad. And Rob, I think this one is best off to you. Asking about cost savings or benefits in regards to reserving instances as opposed to pay-as-you-go.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I, thoroughly recommend leveraging RIs when they make sense. And for those of you who don't know, RIs are reserved instances where you're running VMs. Being able to set a reservation, either a 1 year or a 3 year, can tremendously lower the overall cost of running the compute. And especially since compute's one of the most expensive aspects of Azure, and relative to VDI, I would say the majority of customers are leveraging at least 1 year, and most of them 3-year RIs. And the other thing to mention is negotiated discounts, I believe, in most cases go on top of that, that capability or that discount.
And I would add on to that too, Rob. What we've seen is there's typically a threshold that we're seeing customers reach where RIs make more sense for them based upon their types of workloads. Whether that's a couple hundred simultaneous instances, user sessions, or a couple thousand, it really depends. And there's being a partner of Microsoft, we have access to some solution configuration calculators that can help, map out what are the costs, and does it make sense to do something like an RI versus pay as you grow or pay as you go type of model. But depending upon your particular circumstance, it's not a yes or no type of answer. It depends, a typical consulting answer, right? It depends based upon your type of workloads, how many of them you have, the type of business model that you have. Is it a 12/7 operating model? Is it 24/7? All of that plays a part into whether or not you want to consider RIs versus pay as you grow or go.
And Chad, just to add to that, it also depends on the particular, right? So you might have customers that have RIs for certain workloads, but not for maybe potentially the VDI workloads or something like that.
Correct.
And on the other group that I work in AVS, so if you're shifting your ESX workloads up to Azure, I mean, that's a perfect example of, I would say, almost everybody leverages RIs in those circumstances. And then at the end of, if say you're going to modernize the applications that we're running in that VMware ESX, on Azure environment, later you can shift those RIs to be used in other ways. They don't have to stay just for that one task. So, yeah.
Any other questions?
Got one more in the chat for Rob here is, how do you connect your on-premise environment to the virtual desktop environment in the cloud? So obviously there's going to be on-prem resources. Those VDIs are probably going to need access to. So what are the options for for people for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the physical linkage is really either site-to-site VPN or express routes, and depending on the size of the environment, will dictate that. And it'll also dictate the size of the express route or the size of the VPNs. But as far as for Azure Virtual Desktop accessing those on-prem resources, certainly you can hit your on-prem Active Directory, on-prem files, and on-prem application servers. And even for some folks, it's to map them back to on-prem before they go out to the internet from a virtual desktop perspective. Yet that's kind of where it ends from an AVD perspective, because your Azure Virtual Desktop versus your on-prem VDI environment, they would be two separate environments, unless, of course, you're leveraging Citrix. And I'm sure Emilio can talk to that a little bit more.
Yeah, so we would leverage cloud connectors, right? The cloud connector is going to be a Windows server that needs to be installed in what we call the resource location, right? Each one of those data centers, if you will. And that's what's going to give us, it's going to establish an outbound SSL secure connectivity to Citrix Cloud, and that's how we'll have access into that location. It is very important to note, though, that authentication needs to be working outside of Citrix being there, right? So just the fact that we have the cloud connector won't provide us with domain authentication, right? So we still need to have that already in place before we can leverage Citrix as an additional layer there.
Great, thank you, gentlemen. Any other final questions we can answer for you? Okay, great. Well, I want to take a few minutes to say, well, thank you for participating in the webinar today. Hopefully you learned something, either from a Microsoft, Citrix, or Burwood perspective, or all three, hopefully. If you have any further questions as the the content around this, as we send it out to you, use that link, sign up. We can get back